Fight Club by Chuck Palahniuck. And this is one of the best novels of the late 20th century. It's one of my favorites for obvious reasons. Now, I just have to get this out of the way. The reveal of the split personality doesn't interest me. What interests me is the underlying messages that are in this book, that even in the late 1990s, there were serious problems when it came to society and people. And this just shows if people go a certain route and they're stuck in their offices day in and day out and they focus on external, superficial goals, they will not grow as people and they will be unhappy and unhealthy. And other problems will arise. And it shows here clearly that we have been faced with a serious and a chronic manhood problem, not just in the West, but everywhere. Because when you have a society that doesn't allow men to be men, to express themselves in their own way, you get a lot of people that have a lot of psychological problems. And we have this protagonist here who has his fair share of problems. And you could say maybe the insomnia is to blame for what happens to him, why he has a split personality, and I suffer from chronic insomnia, so I know what that's like. But then he creates this fight club, which allows men to be men, which allows men to not only blow some steam after a hard day, but it also fulfills a more important mission, which is that it gives back men's self-respect, their pride, their dignity in being men. You don't have to be ashamed to be a man in the modern age, which is, of course, one of the top goals of the ruling class, which is to destroy men and then to destroy women and then the family, right? That's their goal. That's what they want to do, and they have in part succeeded. Because even in the 90s and probably even earlier, there were signs of a serious disconnect where it's almost not a crime, but it's almost a shameful thing to be what you were born to be. And these men in this book have been almost traumatized. And of course, if you think that what you are is a mistake, or if you are incorrect somehow, that can cause some problems in your head. And of course that leads to physical problems, health problems, and etc. And these men, the only way they can express themselves and be themselves is to go into this basement and quite literally beat the shit out of each other to regain some of that feeling of what it's like to be a man and to be a man among peers and to not be ashamed of yourself. And that is what makes this one of the greatest books, because there are lessons here that we all should have been taught as children. But because even our parents and even those before them, they weren't taught. Because there are no role models anymore. Because incomplete people raise incomplete people. That's the gist of it. And one criticism that I have, well, it's not really a criticism, I just have to say that the actual Fight Club in this book, it's not really a focus. It's not really the center of attention, and it's not because I want to see more fighting or more action. It's because the Fight Club, it's almost like a temple, and the act of fighting, it's almost like a ritual in a way. It's almost like a sort of spiritual reawakening, and it should have been more focused on. And of course, there is a sequel, a comic book, and I skimmed through it, and it's just not my taste. It goes in strange places. But if I were to make a TV show, right, I would focus on the actual Fight Club and how that affects people in detail, because we kind of get what happens to most of the men that join this Fight Club, and unfortunately, this takes a dark route where what should have been a place of comfort and trust and respect and so on and principles becomes a sort of cult because of the split personality that is the legendary Tyler Durden, which of course I agree with most of his philosophy, what he says. Of course, this book is fantastically quotable. There are quotes here that just knock you off your chair, of course. And they knock you off your chair because when we were young, nobody told us all of this. And this is a great wake-up call. And it was, of course, it's a legendary book. But I don't agree with Tyler Durden as a person because he becomes a sort of messiah, a sort of spiritual leader that has some dark ulterior motives. And this Fight Club that should have been something really special for these people, for these men, becomes a sort of cult, which leads to unnecessary violence. Of course, there are other ways to solve your problems, and of course, the first one is to focus on yourself and to go inward and to look at yourself and make the appropriate corrections. And that's how it begins, but then it turns into this almost military cult that brainwashes these people into being this sort of militia, almost a terrorist organization. Which is a sad thing because, like I said, they should have focused more on this, the actual fighting, because it could have been a way to actually rebirth these men into being better men, but they become these pawns in a game, and they don't even know that they're just puppets on strings, which is unfortunate because they truly believe that they found the answer, which in part they have, but because of this psychopathic leader, they become just, what do you call it, cogs in the wheel, in the machine. They don't really have a say. Once they're accepted in, it's like thinking for yourself becomes forbidden. And of course, the movie shows this very clearly in its almost chanting that you are nothing, you are the manure, you are nothing. And the funny thing about this is that Tyler Durden's uh, advice, if you want to call it that, it's a double-edged sword where it presents half-truths, where he said you could be anything at all, but at the same time he has this almost nihilistic viewpoint where it says you can be anything, but at the same time you are not your khakis, you are not your car, but at the same time he says you are just manure. We are already dead. It's almost like he says nothing really matters, which is interesting because he manages to brainwash these people by saying one positive thing and then one negative thing. You are not your wallet. You are not a bank account, etc., etc. But at the same time, later on, he treats these people that should have been his equals as underlings, as mindless, brainless underlings, and it is unfortunate. And these people, because they found something to latch on, they just can't give it away. They can't detach from it. Even though maybe some of them kind of realize that they're being treated like dirt. They get in, they are shown how great this fight club is. They are raised up, and then they are used like tools for a greater agenda. And of course, the greater agenda, in the end, Tyler Durden's plan is to pretty much destroy everything, to burn everything to the ground and start over, right? And of course, we know how this ends, and the movie is pretty good. It's, of course, in my top because it's legendary. This book it's not even a book, it's a teacher. Because it teaches us a lot of things that we should have been told when we were younger, of course. And because we are not told things when we are children, we feel depressed, we feel unhappy, and maybe sometimes we might have the bad luck of meeting somebody like Tyler Durden, and he might take advantage of us, with his little charming lies that raise us up and then they use us. And that's pretty much it. That is what happens when people are treated like they're less than what they are. A lot of them, they just go along with their lives. They go to work, they retire, and then they slowly get old and die. But sometimes, like our protagonist here, he's so enraged by this, so depressed, and because of his insomnia and because of all the shitty people around him, he has to seek relief, and the only relief is to unconsciously produce or birth this Tyler Durden persona, which of course tries to take over in the end. And the only way to stop him is uh, for the protagonist is to kill himself. But of course, he fails. Or maybe he did it deliberately. You don't really know. Which, of course, teaches us the lesson that sometimes you have to look at yourself in the mirror and get rid of these ugly, narcissistic, egomaniacal sides of ourselves, because they might take over. And sometimes they might be realer than reality. They might actually come to life, and they might start something that cannot be stopped. And that's the lesson or the conclusion of this book, that sometimes you don't have to go along with what you are presented. Sometimes you have to think for yourself, not listen to other people who somehow think that they're better, and they imagine that they can give you advice even though they haven't done anything with their own lives. You just have to take charge of your life and find something that impassions you, because otherwise you're slowly gonna be a sheep, and you're gonna be gullible. And sometimes somebody's gonna come along, and that person's gonna take advantage of you because you don't know any better. And that's Fight Club, one of the best books I have ever written. It's phenomenal. That's about it. Read better books and stop simping.